All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I had a cancellation today, believe it or not. So instead, we've gone with our trusty friend, my partner at the DMZ, Bill Scher. How you doing?
I'm good. I thought you called me in so I could show off my Spanish guitar strumming. This is not going to be the usual DMZ. Can we just do 30 minutes of that? Wouldn't that be great? I think your fans
That is
love
pretty cool. I kind of like that. It's almost like Marty Robbins is sitting, across the table from me. Impressive stuff, Bill. I like
Well,
that.
thank you.
I like the Spanish guitar. I like with the nylon strings. That's the way to go.
I'm
You and
spending
I are
more time
both
on the
dressed
banjo
down.
these days.
Yeah, banjo is harder. I can do a fake banjo on my acoustic guitar, which ain't easy. I'll break that out someday. Banjo is appropriate for how we're dressed. I think we're both in the Tim Walz because apparently he can dress down better than most politicians. So I'm glad that we're cash today, as they say.
I was impressed that Politico ran like a 2,000-word essay on Tim Walz can pull off jeans and a camo cap, and Ron DeSantis can't.
I do like the camo. Apparently, there's like a camo hat that is now branded Harris Walz, and I do think that's pretty smart marketing for them.
So you're coming around on Tim Walz, Matt.
I don't know. I'm not Walz pilled. I can tell you that.
I don't know.
Well, Tim Walz, we'll see how he survives. The camo hat could end up being like Dukakis in the tank if we're not careful. Let me just roll a clip here, Bill. I've got a couple, but as you probably know, things are a little dicey in Walzland.
The running mate has been out and about, and he's sharpening attacks on Vice President Harris and her new running mate, Tim Walz, especially over his 24-year career in the Army National Guard.
When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him. He said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone?
Now, Vance is a Marine veteran who served as a combat correspondent in Iraq. His accusation that Walz is not telling the truth is based in part on this clip posted by the Harris campaign of Walz advocating for gun control.
We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
So, weapons of war that I carried in war. How close was he to war? A National Guard spokesman says Walz deployed to Italy in 2003, where he was part of a security mission in support of the Afghanistan war, but he never served in Afghanistan. In a statement, the campaign said, quote, in his 24 years of service, the governor carried, fired, and trained others to use weapons of war innumerable times. Governor Walz would never insult or undermine any American's service to this country. In fact, he thanks Senator Vance for putting his life on the line for our country. It's the American way. Now, we also heard Vance accuse Walz of ducking service to Iraq when he left the National Guard in 2005 to run for Congress. Here's what we know about that. Now, Walz was already running for Congress when his unit received notice they could deploy to Iraq within 2 years. He actually retired 2 months before his unit received official alert orders for deployment. However, it is not clear when Walz actually filed his retirement paperwork, which often happens months ahead of the actual date. He said in 2009 he left the Guard to focus on his run for Congress. And so far, no answer from the campaign on that particular issue.
All right, that was Dana Bash from CNN. Kind of a long clip, but I think it sets it up. What do you make of that, Bill?
I think this was a bad choice on Trump and Vance to have this be. I mean, look, they threw a lot of things at Walz in the past 48 hours. That I don't think that they necessarily chose to make this the thing, but this is the thing that I think is broken out more than the others. And if I was them, I would have spent a lot more time on the 2020 riots than this. because this is a very weak read that they're clinging to. They're basically putting everything on that in war comment. He made one comment at an event. We talked about carrying weapons in war, not in combat, weapons in war. And he was part of an Operation Enduring Freedom, although not in the Afghanistan theater. He was doing support at a European base in Italy, but he carried a weapon while doing that. And so it'd be one thing if you had like clip after clip and a clip after clip making an insinuation or even outright falsehood that he was in a combat zone.
Yeah.
But you don't have that.
No, but there's two other things. The one thing is the rank. He retired. So apparently he got a promotion, but then he retired. And just because you get a promotion doesn't mean you get to retire at the rank, the promoted rank.
He didn't do enough. He had to take like a course or something. He reached command master sergeant. He didn't do enough to retire at that rank. So when he retired, he was master sergeant. And I think the campaign website has tweaked the bio to make that clearer now.
And then there's also the insinuation that he retired in order to avoid going into combat in Iraq.
And that's what Vance bet all of his chips on in the clip that you just showed, which one ignores that he had retired before 9/11 and then went back into it, re-enlisted after 9/11, and did participate in Operation Enduring Freedom. Then you have a time frame where I think we're a little bit fuzzy in all the particulars, but he announced his run for Congress in February 2006. There was some speculation that his battalion might go into Iraq. He puts out a press statement in March saying, hey, if I get called up, I'll go. But then he retires as of May, and the battalion's called up in July. And Vance treats this as a kind of cut and run. But as others have pointed out, if he was truly needed, the National Guard, the military could say, hey, too bad, buddy, you have to go. It's called stop loss.
Yeah.
So it's Vance is putting heavy spin on this timeline. And I think there are people who were Republicans in his gubernatorial run that try to push this case too, but it didn't stick when he ran for governor. And there's plenty of other people in his unit that defend him on this. I mean, as a literal matter, he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't violate any rule. He didn't violate any principle. He had served 24 years in the National Guard. He was over 40 years old. If a guy says, you know what, I've done enough, I'm going to run for Congress now, I'm not serving Iraq, I think most people would say, yeah, you did your time, buddy. You don't got to do that.
Yeah.
So
no,
I think
you
all
do 24
that makes
years.
this a very weak place for Vance to bet all the chips on. I don't think this is going to something that can sustain multiple news cycles and drag the whole ticket down.
Well, look, I think there's a few things here, right? So Vance is a Marine veteran. Maybe he feels like he has, the high ground to make this attack. Chris LaCivita, who is a top strategist for Trump, was also the driving force, they say, behind the Swiftboat attacks on John Kerry,
which he defended yesterday on X. Nothing disproven.
Well, but as you and I think, touched on during our recent conversation, in regards to Walz's progressive policies and his record as governor of Minnesota, he has the vibes of a veteran and a football coach. And so does that matter more? I mean, look, do the details even matter? Walz feels like a legit veteran. He codes that way. So like John Kerry, may or may not have been a war hero, but he did seem like an elite, effete, cosmopolitan liberal. Walz doesn't seem like a coastal progressive. He is like a old school farm kind of guy.
I think this is more than just vibes, though. I think the details do matter. I'm not saying that they had the details on Kerry, and that was legit, but Kerry was a much different figure in the Vietnam War. He was a prominent soldier who came back to oppose the war. In a very high profile way. It was literally, a feature in Doonesbury comic strips for his high profile activism. So he was marked by conservative war supporters way before he was in elective politics. So there was a long running negative narrative on him. I mean, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm just saying it was kind of baked in. That was resurrected in 2004, and they used people that he did that I don't know how closely they served together. I have to go back and look again, but people who were in Vietnam, and that's why the whole group was called Swiftboat Veterans for Truth. There are people who were on the Swiftboats, I believe. I think someone with John Kerry, which gave it a veneer of credibility. And they also launched that in August, which was supposed to be kind of a sleepy time for the whole general election season. And this was in a different media landscape where kind of the rhythm of the news cycle was changing. And the Kerry campaign, not unreasonably, in my opinion, given what people knew at the time, but obviously wrong in retrospect, felt, you know what? These are a bunch of yahoos. We don't want to give this oxygen. Let's hold off on like a real, concerted response, and let's kind of see how this plays out. And then it kind of took on a life of its own. By the time Kerry did weigh in, had gone around the world a few times. Now we're in this constant, minute by minute social media news cycle where, the fact check is happening in real time, and not even wholly driven by the campaign. There people just show up and do it, online. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why I think this is not going to play out the way the 2004 Swiftboat campaign did. But it does speak to, I think, kind of what's in the Republican DNA. Democrat with a military record, we can't let that become a thing. We got to do something to slay that narrative out of the box. Whereas I think in this case, we talked about this in the last show, I'm not saying Walz is the worst human because of how he handled the riots, but it was a little messy. It was a little complicated, and I think there were more threads to pull there than there are on his military service, but they were just too enamored with or too frightened.
Yeah.
By the notion.
Do you think, will that keep? I mean, they could do that next week, or do you think that they had one shot to define him, and going forward, he's going to be more of an afterthought, and it's going to be Kamala versus Trump? In other words,
you got a few days to kind of dig into the VP.
Yeah. And
if you don't get a real meat hook in, like with Vance and Chalice Cat Ladies that had staying power, you don't get your meat hooks in the first 24, 48 hours, VP has become an afterthought, and you're back to the top of the ticket.
Well, speaking of the top of the ticket, JD Vance has been trolling Kamala Harris, sort of bracketing her rallies, holding press conferences to try to illustrate the fact that he is available, accessible to the press. She is not. The other day, Thursday morning, I tweeted that if there's a narrative slowly developing that says Kamala won't do press conferences, isn't going to debate or may not debate, and if she allows that to metastasize, then eventually she's going to have like a sit-down interview or a press conference, and it's going to be built up. It's going to be like appointment TV, and that's not good. So I tweeted what Kamala should do is just go to a local reporter, sit down with Walz, like you and I were talking about the other day, and just do it and get it out of the way, and low stakes. Don't let it build up. Well, lo and behold, she sort of took a little bit of that advice. She has, I guess, a traveling press corps with her. She went up to him on Thursday after I tweeted that, and here's how it went.
President Trump had a press conference today. He talked about a lot of things. What if you have reaction to what he talked about?
Well, I'm glad that he's finally agreed to a debate on September 10th. I'm looking forward to it, and hope he shows up.
Are you open to more debate?
I am happy to have that conversation about an additional debate for after September 10th, for sure.
He proposed two more debates.
Like I said, happy to have that conversation.
Why do you think he pulled pulls out of the debate with you? Why do you think
I am
he's so
beyond trying to speculate about how he thinks. What else?
Can you comment on some of his other criticisms? He made a whole litany of them today. Some of them are about your...
I was too busy talking to voters. I didn't hear him.
Some of the criticism has been about your vice presidential pick and his leaving the National Guard at 24 years. Vance said that he deserted his own troops or his own colleagues. What's your take on that?
Listen, I praise anyone who has presented themselves to serve our country. And I think that we all should.
Madam Vice President, there's been a lot of questions about when you're going to sit down for your first interview since being the nominee.
I've talked to my team. I want us to get an interview scheduled before the end of the month.
Thank you.
What do you make about the attack on your husband's face?
Thank you so much.
All right. So, I mean, not a lot of content there, but she does maybe take away some of the, narrative that she's not talking to the press. What do you make of it?
So I did a post. I was responding to Brit Hume was making the point that Kamala doesn't want to do this because she's afraid and it shows weakness and she's not confident. And, Trump's out there saying how she's not smart. I presume they might believe a lot of their own narrative. I don't think they have a lot of respect for Harris. And I'm sure it's very disorienting for them that Harris is now beating Trump in most polls, not by a lot, but enough that you can't say that, Trump's the front runner anymore. You do, when you're a candidate, this is what I said on X. I'll just expand that on a little bit. You do the amount of media that you have to do. A candidate, a campaign wants to control the message as much as possible. You want to do as much stagecraft as possible because you control everything. Anything you do that is unscripted, whether it's a town hall setting, whether it's a media interview, whether it's a debate, whether a press conference, you can't know exactly how that's going to go, and something might crop up that's not your preferred message for the day. Now, of course, it's very hard to do none of that because people then start to ask questions. Why won't you submit yourself to the public? But you don't really want to go out of your way to do things that you don't know how they're going to exactly turn out. Over the past 2 weeks, Kamala Harris has been almost solely staged, and she has gained in the polls about 4 or 5 points. So why would you stop doing that? If it's one thing if you're doing the station, it was like, I'm sick of this pablum and this vacuous campaign you're doing. I'm unimpressed and I'm not going to give you my support. Then you might say, I guess I got to do something. I got to show a little bit more leg to kind of generate some better news coverage here. That's not what's happening so far. Now, of course, there's a finite ability to do that. At some point, people will start to ask questions. Why aren't you doing more? So I'm not saying she can do that forever.
That's my point. I think a Democrat running for office can endure the typical attacks from the right, from Fox News, from talk radio. Once the mainstream media starts criticizing you, that is not as sustainable. And that tends to blow up and not turn out well. So I think that we're now at the point that it was wise. Her rollout was wise, and it was smart to do these rallies and have it be more scripted. But I think she's starting to enter the danger zone. And I want to give her credit because I think what she did yesterday by having that little scrum, press scrum as they call it, was actually very smart. It's small. And it's not going to appease all her critics. Eventually, she's going to have a sit down with Lester Holt or somebody. But I think this buys her time, and it stops that narrative from developing.
She has 10 days between now and the convention, so it's a little bit of a chunk of time before having an interview. So she said there in that gaggle end of the month, which I think she probably means. I think she'd probably like to get through the convention, staying scripted before having when she does and she might do what you suggested, which I think is a perfectly fine idea, to do the local ones first. Yeah. Which probably wouldn't be as hardball, but you never know. You never know for sure.
I also think the element of surprise is key. You just go up to a reporter and be like, hey, what do you got? I think that's literally, I don't have the clip, but she walked up and said something to that effect yesterday. Right. What do y'all got?
And when I
You
think
got
when you
one.
do that, you get the kind of question she got was just, I want your reaction to the news of the day.
Yeah.
If she's doing like a sit down 30 minutes with 60 minutes or something like that, it's going to be, when did you know Joe Biden was losing it? Why are you flip-flopping on fracking? Why are you flip-flopping on the border? Didn't you screw up the border in the first place? It's all the things that she really doesn't want to have front and center. And I'm not saying she can't handle it, but again, it's just not how you want to stage.
She's going to have to have answers to the exact questions you just.
Correct. Yeah. And so probably best for her if she can stretch it out and get through that convention and kind of stay on this groove and save it for like last week of August, people going on Labor Day vacation, like not necessarily the biggest deal in the world to pay attention to political news. And because, I mean, the risk would be that you get a bunch of news cycles between now and the convention that are more negative, that she's hiding and maybe they dig up something about Walz's past that you didn't want to have be a big deal and you haven't filled up the media vacuum with something else. But the Trump press conference yesterday cuts against that worry, because if Trump's going to fill the space with his own nonsense, that arguably is perfectly fine for Kamala Harris. I know the 2016 logic was Trump just putting himself out there, no matter how ridiculous or offensive it was, meant that he was the focus of attention. He is dominating the news cycle. And even if it's bad attention, attention is attention. And it's going to work out in the end for him. I think that logic has limited utility. He got away with it in 2016, just barely. I don't think it's worked for him ever since. And I think the shtick has gotten very, very played. So I would think Kamala could push it longer and let Trump bitch and moan about it. I mean, it's one thing if Trump bitched and moaned and stayed focused on Kamala's not speaking. She says, I'm speaking, but she's not speaking. She won't speak to you. But he can't stop himself from going on 10 other tangents, which put the attention on him and take the focus off of her.
And I think Trump almost was getting pressured into having an appearance. And I think he's got a rally maybe in Montana this weekend. But I think
today
Trump was under pressure because it looked like JD Vance was much more energetic than Trump. JD Vance was, following Kamala around the country, holding these events, and Trump is like playing golf. I want to show a clip of JD Vance because I feel like he is still not good. He has not gotten better, and he is not a happy warrior. And this clip, I think, illustrates that.
You've been criticized as being a little too serious, maybe angry sometimes. What makes you smile? What makes you happy?
Well, I smile at a lot of things, including bogus questions from the media, man. I mean, look, I think if you watch a full speech that I give, I actually I'm having a good time out here and I'm enjoying this. But look, sometimes you got to take the good with the bad. And right now, I am angry about what Kamala Harris has done to this country and done to the American southern border. And I think that most people in our country, they can be happy-go-lucky sometimes, they can enjoy things sometimes, and they can turn on the news and recognize that what's going on in this country is a disgrace.
He's not that good at this, is he?
I don't think he is. I think it was a lame question. I don't find JD Vance constantly scowly. I think it's as lame a question as going to a female politician saying, "Why don't you smile more?"
No, I think,
but you got to answer the question in a way that is.
Well, I think, but his answer proved the point.
Yeah, he gave a dumb answer to a dumb question, and instead of being peevish about the media, he should have just been more, Walz pilled and just shown some genuine joy. And look, I don't think, as you know, Matt, I've written about JD Vance a lot in the past 24 hours, which I think does, if you read the, I have a column and I have kind of a companion newsletter piece. I think it does show how phony Vance is, and what's crazy. I mean, there are a lot of phony politicians in the world. He's not the first one, but I can't even any other example like this. He literally has a book. I mean, it's not just any book. It is the reason why we know who he is. He was nobody before this book. It's a genuinely interesting book. I'm not saying it's beyond criticism on its own merits, but like it's interesting. It's fairly well written. It made him a celebrity. He would not be running for office if he didn't have this book. It's what defined him. And the messages of this book are not the messages he delivers as a politician. And this book was written 5 years before he first ran for office, only 8 years ago. It is a stunning period of time to evolve into a different character. Yeah. And look, I think most people haven't really done the juxtaposition of it. So I'm not saying it's top of mind to everybody, but I think it kind of comes through, subconsciously. There's something about Vance that doesn't feel authentic. And that one clip, I think, it's a little intangible. I can't perfectly put it into words, but I do think there's a vibe there that feels kind of smarmy and weird, to use the common phrasing, which is one of the reasons why I think the weird thing lands. Like it doesn't feel right.
Yes. So you went through pretty meticulously and looked at a lot of Vance's statements, trying to find when he changed. Were you able to narrow down when that was?
Yeah, I'm kind of speculative here. I'm just looking at interviews that he did, but he was increasingly negative about Trump in 20. Let me pull back a little bit, and I think I feel like I did actually an X thread last night, which I think was even a little bit better about the chronology than even the two pieces I wrote. The book comes out in June of 2016. When he's writing the book, he's got no idea that Donald Trump's going to be the nominee, let alone the president of the United States in a few months. It's not what the book was intended to be about. But it's coming out in the middle of the Trump campaign. And clearly, whether it's him or his publisher or whatever, they realize we have an opportunity here to kind of ride this Trump curiosity. And so in July of 2016, he's got a piece in The Atlantic where he is both explaining Trump voters and criticizing Trump very strongly. He calls Trump cultural heroin, who's saying things that his people want to hear, but he's not going to be able to deliver them, and they're going to be let down by him. So he presents himself in the book's rollout as, I know these people. I might be a Yale Law School graduate and San Francisco venture capitalist, but I'm from hillbilly stock. And so I know how these people think, and I can explain what's going on to you, Atlantic reader, New York Times reader, and do so in a way that shows that I get how the upper middle class works. I get how this cultural milieu works, but I also get how the hillbilly culture works. So he becomes this Trump voter whisperer through the course of 2016. And he says by the end of it, I'm not even going to vote for Trump. I'm a never Trumper. I'm voting for Evan McMullin. And then he does a couple interviews, at least, in February 2017. And he doesn't reject what he said, but just the tone is different. It's focused more on, how Trump pulled this off, and why his voters think this way, and why Trump's relatable. By 2018, he does an interview with the Financial Times where he's saying, Trump's not even my biggest problem with the Republican Party. It's these 80s era thinking from Republicans about taxes and healthcare reform. And he's still talking more about, sort of what, Trump voters are all about and sort of how they're kind of more, salt of the earth. And then by 2019, he's outright praising the realignment of the Republican Party into a more populist direction and saying it really predates Donald Trump. And the thing we have to make sure is that we don't go back to the old way. And I should also say, in this time frame, mind you, so I just gave you 2017, 2018, 2019. In 2017, he considers running for the Senate. He considers running against Sherrod Brown. He moves back to Ohio from San Francisco, almost immediately considers a Senate run, backs off of it. He just had a baby, I believe, at that time. But it's clear that he is working through, how do I fit in this Republican Party? How do I fit in Trump's Republican Party? And I'm clearly trying to define myself as someone who was part of it, who does not want to go back to the pre-Trump party. Forget what I said about being a never-Trumper before. And then by the time he actually runs in 2021, one of the first interviews he gives is that he says, I regret saying all that bad stuff about Trump. He's been a great president. So it's just a stunning, breakneck speed of evolution that, I saw someone, I'm sorry to go on and on, Matt, but I saw an anonymous person at the Republican convention tell a reporter, suburban voters should watch Hillbilly Elegy, watch the Netflix movie Hillbilly Elegy. They don't want you to read Hillbilly Elegy. Because there's stuff in here where he says there is a growing conservative movement. Let me try to find the actual page here, because it's just astounding to me.
I saw someone call it Hillbilly Eulogy as a more appropriate
elegy is supposed to be a poem about the dead. Look, Matt, if a Democrat said this, Matt, how would you respond? Similarly, when people do fail, this mindset allows them to look outward. I once ran into an old acquaintance at a Middletown bar. Middletown, Ohio is suburban Cincinnati, where he mostly grew up, which is outside of Appalachia, though we obviously spent some time in Appalachia with his grandmother. His acquaintance, who told me he had recently quit his job because he was sick of waking up early. I later saw him complaining on Facebook about the, quote, Obama economy, unquote, and how it affected his life. I don't doubt that the Obama economy has affected many, but this man is surely not among them. His status in life is directly attributable to the choices he's made, and his life will improve only through better decisions. But for him to make better choices, he needs to live in an environment that forces him to ask tough questions about himself. There is a cultural movement in the white working class to blame problems on society or the government, and that movement gains adherents by the day. Here is where the rhetoric of modern conservatives, and I say this as one of them, fails to meet the real challenges of their biggest constituents. Instead of encouraging engagement, conservatives increasingly foment the kind of detachment that has sapped the ambition of so many of my peers. I have watched some friends blossom into successful adults and others fall victim to the worst of Middletown's temptations: premature parenthood, drugs, incarceration. What separates the successful from the unsuccessful are the expectations that they had for their own lives. Yet the message of the right is increasingly, it's not your fault that you're a loser. It's the government's fault. If a Democrat said that, Matt, sir, would be livid.
No, Tom Nichols recently told me that Republicans now talk about white people the way we used to criticize Democrats for talking about black people. So I think there's something there. As a graduate of Middletown High School, Middletown, Maryland, I concur. I think that the JD Vance of Hillbilly Elegy is onto something. Now, obviously, two things can be true, right? It can be true that people can be captured by a toxic environment that doesn't give them really a fighting chance to succeed, not a fair chance at least. And it can also be true that as individuals, it is your responsibility to find a way out and to succeed. And that may require actually relocating and to an environment that will not be tempting to you, or will not be, maybe you have to go to where a job is, actually.
Well, and Vance writes this in the National Review. in 2014, before Hillbilly Elegies, who's just out of Yale Law School. He writes a whole piece saying that Appalachia specifically is not a place where people can thrive, and that the best and can't be fixed by government policies, and the best anti-poverty program is a ticket out. And even calls Eastern Kentucky a place where students grew up wanting to draw a government check because there's something, and they weren't born that way, that there's something, quote, destructive about the community of Eastern Kentucky. Now, and Matt, as you say, like maybe there is some truth to all that, but it's not what JD Vance says today. The movement he's talking about in Hillbilly Elegy is what becomes the MAGA movement, which he embraces. He says only to these people in the movement what they want to hear, not that they're losers, not that they shouldn't blame people or blame. I mean, at some point they shouldn't blame faceless corporations, and yet he is talking now about how the Fortune 100 are and the childless cat ladies are destroying the economy and ruining the lives of the white working class. It's just. So it goes well beyond like, I thought Trump wasn't so good, but he was better than I thought to be. There is a 180, and there's a whole philosophy of how his people should interact with society.
I'm starting to think maybe he's a phony. I'm just going to say. All right. Well, Bill, always a pleasure, man. Thanks for stopping by on very short notice and having this conversation.
Always a pleasure as well, and I'll talk to you next week.
You got it. Thanks, man.
Bye.